Imagine a religious group that built the sprawling, glittering city of Cairo literally from scratch
Right.
and commanded this impenetrable network of mountain fortresses across Persia, was completely and utterly wiped off the map by the Mongol invasion.
Annihilated, yeah.
And somehow they reemerged centuries later as one of the most powerful, highly educated, modern humanitarian organizations on Earth.
It's quite a resume.
It really is.
Yeah.
I mean, when you picture ancient religious traditions, you probably have this automatic expectation of, well, rigidity, right?
Absolutely.
You picture, like, dusty scrolls locked in a glass case, rules that were set in stone 1,000 years ago.
Yeah, a system of belief that is fundamentally about preserving the past in amber, essentially.
Exactly.
And that assumption is just everywhere. We tend to think that to be authentic to an ancient tradition, an institution has to be entirely unyielding.
Right, like any change is a betrayal.
Precisely. The common narrative dictates that adapting to the modern world, updating laws, or, embracing new scientific paradigms is somehow a compromise.
Like a dilution of the original pure truth.
Right.
But what if you encountered a tradition built entirely around the exact opposite idea?
Now that is where it gets interesting.
Yeah, a religious worldview where constant living evolution isn't a compromise at all, but the actual beating heart of the theology.
Yeah.
A system that somehow manages to take intensely complex medieval Greek philosophy and just seamlessly wire it into a massive 21st century global development network.
It sounds almost like a contradiction, but it's not.
And that is the mission for this deep dive. We are looking at a thoroughly detailed stack of research notes focused on Ismaili Islam.
Yes, we are.
We are going to unpack how a very specific, deeply painful succession dispute back in the 8th century sparked what has evolved into, frankly, one of the most intellectually rigorous and adaptable communities in the world today.
And we are looking at this not just as a fascinating set of theological beliefs,
Right.
but as a sociological and psychological roadmap for resilience.
I love that framing.
Because if you have ever wondered how any human institution actually survives, how a community navigates the rise and fall of their own empires, devastating military annihilations, and the sheer dizzying pace of modern globalization.
Yeah, the stuff that usually breaks institutions.
Exactly. The history detailed in our sources is an absolute masterclass in survival and adaptation.
So to understand how they engineered that kind of resilience, we have to go back to the blueprint, right? We have to look at the shared foundation of Islam itself before any of the branching happened.
Yeah, to understand how radical the divergence becomes later on, we first have to recognize the massive unified trunk that all these branches grow out of.
The core beliefs.
Right. All major branches of Islam, Sunni, Twelver Shia, Ismaili Shia, and others, they share an absolutely unified core.
Okay.
They all agree on the absolute, indivisible oneness of God. They all recognize Muhammad as the final prophet who delivered the ultimate revelation.
The foundational stuff.
Exactly. They revere the Quran as that revealed scripture, and they share a fundamental, unbreakable commitment to living an ethical life, worshiping God, and preparing for a day of judgment.
So if you picture a colossal ancient tree, that is the solid, immovable trunk.
That's a great way to put it.
Everyone in the Islamic world is standing on that exact same foundation. But trees grow, and eventually they branch.
We do.
We hit this massive historical fork in the road immediately following the death of the Prophet Muhammad in the year 632 CE.
A very critical year.
Yeah, and it is crucial to understand that this first major fork wasn't about the core theology of God or the authenticity of the Quran. It was entirely about a crisis of authority.
Exactly. Who has the right to guide the community after the ultimate leader is suddenly gone?
Right, because the psychological shock to the early community must have been, it cannot be overstated.
Oh, it was profound.
Yeah.
Muhammad was not just a spiritual guide. He was the political leader, the judge, the military commander, and the direct conduit to the divine.
So when he dies, it's just this massive vacuum.
An existential vacuum. For the majority, who eventually become Sunni Muslims, and they make up roughly 85 to 90% of Muslims today.
Right.
Their answer was that leadership, in a political and administrative sense, belongs to the community.
So they didn't look for a single divine successor.
No. They believed the prophet did not explicitly designate a single successor. So authority essentially rests in the Quran, the documented sayings and actions of the prophet, and the collective consensus of religious scholars.
Okay, so there is no single, living, divinely appointed leader acting as an infallible guide for all Sunnis.
Exactly.
But the Shia branch takes a completely different path here.
Yes, fundamentally different. They believe the prophet did explicitly designate a successor, his cousin and son-in-law, Ali.
So for the Shia, leadership isn't something you figure out by committee or consensus.
No, it is a divine appointment that must remain strictly within the family of the prophet.
Okay, so that's the first big split. But the trunk doesn't just split once. If we move forward to the 8th century, within the Shia branch itself, we hit another devastating crossroads.
And this specific crossroads is where Ismaili Islam officially begins to take its distinct shape.
Right, the succession crisis of the 8th century?
Yeah, the crisis occurs following the death of the 6th Imam, Jafar al-Sadiq, in the year 765 CE.
Okay.
Now, Jafar al-Sadiq was a towering intellectual figure, deeply revered across the Muslim world, even by early Sunni scholars.
Wow, okay.
But his death triggered a profound fracture over which of his sons was the legitimate, divinely appointed successor.
So you have a grieving community suddenly forced to choose between brothers.
Yes.
The sources say a large portion of the community followed a son named Musa al-Kazim.
And that specific group, following Musa al-Kazim, eventually evolves over the centuries into what we now call Twelver Shia Islam.
Which is the largest Shia group in the world today, right?
Yes, predominantly centered in places like Iran and Iraq.
But another significant group insisted the succession pass through a different son, Ismail ibn Jafar. And this is the genesis of Ismaili Shia Islam.
That's the one.
Now, if you were listening to this on your commute or, while cooking dinner, this might just sound like incredibly dense historical genealogy.
Right, like two brothers, two factions, a political dispute from over 1,000 years ago.
Yeah, but the implications of this choice fundamentally change the entire architecture of their reality.
It really does.
Because the split wasn't simply about who sits in the chair of leadership. It completely altered the mechanism of how divine guidance is actually sustained on Earth.
Yes, a question of historical lineage immediately transformed into a massive question of epistemology.
Meaning the philosophy of how we know what is true.
Exactly. The Ismaili followers maintained that the rightful line of Imams continued through Ismail and his descendants in an unbroken, continuous chain.
Unbroken.
Right. They embedded a core belief into their theology. Humanity will always require a continuous, living, breathing guide to interpret divine truth for every single new era.
So I was trying to map this onto something we deal with today to kind of wrap my head around it, and I came up with an analogy.
Okay, let's hear it.
Think of this massive succession crisis like a constitutional crossroad for a newly formed nation.
Oh, I like where this is going.
So the Sunni and Twelver models are somewhat like relying on the original founding documents, the Constitution, and then establishing a Supreme Court of highly educated, meticulous scholars to carefully interpret those old texts whenever a modern problem arises.
Right. You rely heavily on historical precedent, exhaustive textual analysis, and the collective wisdom of legal scholars.
Exactly. You are constantly looking back at the original text to govern the present.
Yeah.
But the Ismaili model throws that structure out the window. It is like having a living constitutional monarch who sits on the bench today, possessing the exact same active divine authority as the original founders.
That is a brilliant way to phrase it.
So this living figure has the mandate to continually adapt, reinterpret, and essentially rewrite the application of the laws for the present day. You aren't just looking backward through a telescope to figure out what the founders meant.
No, you're having a conversation with a living figure who holds that same guiding authority right now.
Right.
And shifting the center of gravity from historical preservation to continuous dynamic interpretation fundamentally rewires the psychology of the believer.
It has to.
To fully grasp how radical this living guide concept is, we need to look at what happened to the Twelver Shia, the group that followed the other brother.
Okay, yeah. Let's look at the contrast.
So the Twelver line of Imams continued from father to son until the 12th Imam. But in the year 874 CE, according to Twelver theology, a monumental event occurred.
What happened?
This 12th Imam went into what is called occultation.
Occultation, meaning he was literally hidden from the physical world.
Hidden, but not dead. In Twelver belief, he is alive, miraculously concealed by God, and will return as a messianic figure, the Mahdi, at the end of time to restore absolute justice.
Wow. Okay.
But think about the practical reality of that belief. For the Twelver community, because the Imam is physically absent in an occultation, direct, divinely appointed leadership is essentially paused.
Oh, right, because he's not physically there to make rulings.
Exactly. In his absence, highly trained religious scholars, the ayatollahs and clerics, must guide the community. They are stewards waiting for the return.
But for the Ismailis, that pause button was never pushed.
Never.
They believe the line of Imams never went into occultation. There is always, at every single chaotic moment in human history, a physically present living Imam.
Yes.
And our sources note that for the Nizari Ismailis, which is the largest branch today, that living Imam is Shah Karim al-Husseini, known globally as the Aga Khan Development.
Right. He is recognized as the 49th hereditary Imam in direct descent from the Prophet.
So the psychological difference this creates for the community has to be staggering.
It really is.
Yeah.
The Ismaili perspective, as detailed in the research notes, views this continuous living guide not just as a theological technicality, but as an absolute mercy and necessity.
A necessity, why?
Think about the crushing anxiety of historical distance. As centuries turn into millennia, languages change, cultures vanish, and ancient texts can be interpreted in 1,000 wildly different, often contradictory ways.
Yeah, that happens all the time.
Without a singular living guide, religious interpretation inevitably becomes fragmented.
It fractures into endless sectarian debates over what, like, a specific word in an ancient scroll meant.
Exactly. The living Imam prevents that fragmentation. Because the Imam is a contemporary figure living in the modern world, he possesses the active authority to adapt the practices of the faith to modern contexts.
Which is huge.
It is. And this mechanism is precisely why you see modern Ismaili communities placing such a massive institutional emphasis on things that might seem surprisingly contemporary for a 1,000-year-old faith.
Like what?
While mandating global education for both boys and girls, pushing for gender equality, and encouraging active integration into modern professional and civic life.
Because the Imam observes the current era and tailors the community's focus to thrive within it.
Right.
There's actually a metaphor straight from the research notes that crystallizes this, and I want to lay it out for you, the listener, because it makes the distinction incredibly sharp.
Oh, the mountain metaphor.
Yeah. Imagine religion as a highly complex map attempting to guide you up a treacherous mountain, and the summit of that mountain represents God.
Right. And you are navigating ravines, unpredictable weather, and changing terrain.
Exactly. The Sunni approach to climbing this mountain is like trusting the collective memory and the meticulously kept records of the entire community of hikers who have ever walked the trail before you.
Yes.
The Twelver Shia approach is like trusting the incredibly detailed historical journals written by the original master guides before they disappeared. But the Ismaili approach is built on the absolute conviction that there is a living master guide actively walking ahead of you on the trail right at this very moment.
And because that living guide is physically on the trail with you, they have the real-time authority to say, look, I know the map from 1,000 years ago says we should cross the river on the left, but there was a landslide yesterday. Today, we need to cross on the right.
Wow, yeah.
That is the theological flexibility they possess. It allows for an extraordinary degree of adaptation.
So outer practices and social focus may vary significantly more over time than in traditions where religious law was permanently fixed by centuries-old scholarly consensus.
Exactly.
Wait, but hold on. If the text is entirely adaptable and this living guide is constantly tweaking the faith to survive the modern world, how do they actually engage with the Quran?
Ah, that is the big question.
Because the Quran is an ancient, unchanging scripture, you can't just throw out the holy book when it feels outdated. Managing that tension between an ancient, fixed text and a mandate for constant modern evolution must have required some serious intellectual gymnastics.
It didn't just require gymnastics. It birthed one of the most highly sophisticated, deeply layered philosophical frameworks in all of Islamic history.
Really?
Yeah. To reconcile an unchanging scripture with an evolving world, Ismaili intellectuals synthesized classic Quranic theology with profound external influences.
Like what kind of influences?
They drew heavily on Greek philosophy, specifically the works of Plato and Aristotle, and they deeply integrated Neoplatonism alongside ancient Persian intellectual traditions.
Okay, we need to pause here and translate this.
Sure.
When you say they integrated Neoplatonism, what does that actually look like in practice? Let's break that down for someone who hasn't taken a graduate-level philosophy seminar.
Fair enough. Neoplatonism is essentially a philosophical framework that visualizes the universe not as a physical creation made out of nothing, but as a series of emanations flowing out of a single, utterly unknowable, perfect source.
Emanations. Okay.
Think of it like light radiating from the sun. The sun itself is so blindingly pure you can't look at it or even fully comprehend it.
Right.
But the light flows outward. The closest rays are incredibly bright and pure, but as the light travels further away, bouncing off planets and dust, it gets dimmer and more distorted.
Okay, I can picture that.
In this model, the physical world we live in is just the furthest, dimmest emanation of that original divine light.
So physical reality is just a shadow of a much higher spiritual reality.
Precisely. And Ismaili thinkers took this Greek framework and applied it directly to Islamic theology.
Wow.
This became the central engine of their intellectual tradition, the concept of dual layers of reality, which translates into dual layers of religion.
Dual layers.
Yes. They categorize these two layers using two vital Arabic terms, zahir and batin.
Zahir and Batin. Those seem like the master keys to this whole worldview.
They really are. Zahir refers to the outer, visible, literal meaning of things.
Like the physical stuff.
Yeah, it is the literal ink on the pages of the scripture, the physical movements of ritual prayer, the formal laws, the dietary restrictions. It is the surface-level reality of religion.
Okay. And Batin.
Batin, on the other hand, is the inner, hidden, spiritual, and deeply symbolic meaning that resides behind those outer forms.
So when they read the scripture, they're reading it almost like poetry, looking for the metaphor, rather than reading it like a strict legal manual.
It is an intensely symbolic reading, and the reason they must read it symbolically goes back to their view of God.
How so?
Ismaili theology views God as absolutely transcendent. God is so far beyond human comprehension, so infinitely removed from our dim, physical reality, that God cannot be accurately described by limited, clunky human words.
Right, because we just don't have the vocabulary.
Exactly. If God is infinite, applying physical human attributes to God is almost an insult to his majesty. Therefore, any language in the scripture that describes God must be understood as purely symbolic.
So when the text mentions God's hand guiding someone or God sitting on a throne, they aren't picturing a giant physical being in the clouds.
Not at all. They are writing those physical descriptions, the zahir, specifically to decode and access the profound, hidden spiritual truths, the batin.
That is fascinating.
Philosophically, they believe human beings are trapped in the dimmest outer edge of the light. The entire goal of the believer is to elevate their soul back up through those spiritual levels toward the source.
And how do they do that?
The only way to climb that ladder is through the acquisition of knowledge. Knowledge, or ilm in Arabic, is not viewed as a dry academic exercise.
It's not just about getting smart.
No. Studying science, exploring philosophy, decoding the cosmos, these are sacred, deeply spiritual acts of ascension.
But hold on, let me play devil's advocate for you here.
Go for it.
If this inner, hidden, symbolic meaning, the batin, is the ultimate goal, and God is entirely beyond all physical description, why do they bother with the physical rituals at all? Doesn't the physical act, the zahir, become completely useless if you're only focused on the high-level philosophy? Like, if the physical world is just a dim shadow, shouldn't you just abandon the rules and sit around meditating on the inner truth?
It is a brilliant question, and frankly, it is the exact accusation that many rival groups leveled against the Ismailis throughout history.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Outsiders often assume that because Ismailis focus so heavily on the hidden meaning, they were secretly abandoning the laws of Islam.
That makes sense that people would think that.
But the source material is explicitly clear on this.
Right.
The goal of Ismaili theology is never to discard the material for the spiritual. The ultimate objective is to harmonize the two.
Harmonize. So one doesn't cancel out the other.
Think about human biology. You cannot access or experience a human soul without a physical body. And a physical body without a soul is just a corpse.
Wow. Okay, yeah.
The physical practices of the faith, the physical act of charity, the communal gathering, the structured prayers, these are the necessary physical vessels that contain the spiritual truth.
They're the container.
Exactly. By engaging in the physical acts with deep intellectual awareness of their symbolic meaning, the believer bridges the gap. They harmonize the physical world with their spiritual potential.
So they are approaching the standard practices of the faith with this incredibly intense, layered philosophical lens.
Yes.
And what absolutely blows my mind about this is that this dense, Neoplatonic, highly academic approach to religion didn't just stay trapped in the medieval equivalent of an ivory tower.
No, it certainly did not.
They didn't just sit in dimly lit libraries debating Greek philosophy. This hyper-intellectual framework became the actual fuel for massive, aggressive political and social movements.
It did.
It led them to literally build real-world empires.
The translation of this esoteric philosophy into raw geopolitical power is one of the most dramatic historical arcs imaginable.
It's cinematic.
When we look at the history of Ismaili political power, we see this theology mobilized on a staggering scale. The absolute zenith, the golden age of Ismaili political supremacy, was the Fatimid Caliphate.
Right, the Fatimids.
Which dominated the Mediterranean from the 10th to the 12th centuries.
We need to give some scale to this. This wasn't some minor, forgotten regional kingdom.
Not at all. It was a sprawling, immensely powerful empire centered in North Africa and Egypt, rivaling and often surpassing the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad and the Byzantine Empire in Constantinople.
Which is saying something.
To understand their legacy, you just have to look at modern geography. Under the Fatimids, the city of Cairo was founded.
Built from scratch.
They built it from the ground up as their imperial capital.
They literally founded Cairo. That alone is a massive historical footprint.
And within Cairo, they established Al-Azhar University.
Oh, wow.
Today, Al-Azhar is widely considered one of the oldest, most prestigious, and most influential institutions of Sunni Islamic learning in the world.
But it started as Ismaili.
Yes. It was originally founded by the Ismaili Fatimid Imams as a premier center for Ismaili theology, science, and philosophy.
That is wild.
During the Fatimid era, because of their theological mandate to pursue knowledge, the empire became a magnet for the greatest minds in astronomy, medicine, mathematics, and architecture. It was a true superpower, intellectually and militarily.
And they weren't just sitting behind the walls of Cairo either. The sources detail this massive, highly sophisticated missionary network they deployed to expand their influence.
Yes, the Dawah.
Right.
Now, this wasn't a group of people handing out pamphlets on a street corner.
Yeah, not quite.
The Dawah was a highly organized, deeply trained network of missionaries known as Das. These Dawas were elite intellectuals.
Like incredibly highly educated.
They were trained in Cairo, fluent in multiple languages, experts in local customs, and deeply versed in both Islamic theology and Greek philosophy.
So they were debaters.
Master debaters. They traveled the major global trade routes, moving deep into Persia, across Central Asia, down into the Indian subcontinent, and along the coast of East Africa.
Everywhere.
They would engage local scholars in high-level philosophical debates, slowly winning over intellectual elites and systematically building deeply rooted Ismaili communities across the known world.
So it was a top-down approach.
Often, yes. Many of the Ismaili communities thriving today in places like Pakistan, India, Tajikistan, or Kenya are the direct, unbroken descendants of the people who converted along those ancient trade routes, thanks to the dais.
So you have this golden age. You have an empire, incredible wealth, groundbreaking science, and a global network of intellectual missionaries.
A true golden age.
But history is rarely kind to empires.
It is the iron law of history. Empires decay.
Yeah.
The Fatimid Caliphate eventually suffered from internal strife, external pressure from the Crusades, and famine, ultimately collapsing in the late 12th century.
Which changes everything.
Completely. And the collapse of the Fatimids leads to a dramatic, almost cinematic shift in Ismaili history. The center of gravity moves from the opulent palaces of Cairo to the harsh, rugged mountains of medieval Persia and Syria.
Focusing on the Nizari Ismaili branch, right?
Yes, this is the era of the mountain fortresses.
The mountain fortresses. I mean, this transition feels like it was ripped straight out of a fantasy epic.
It really does, and it is one of the most heavily romanticized and misunderstood periods in history.
Okay, set the scene for us.
Following a succession dispute after the Fatimid collapse, the Nizari Ismailis found themselves surrounded by the violently hostile Seljuk Empire.
And the Seljuks were massive, right?
A massive Sunni Turkic state that actively wanted to eradicate them.
So they are in serious danger.
Mortal danger. To survive, a brilliant, highly strategic leader named Hassani Saba executed a masterful plan.
What did he do?
He and his followers infiltrated and captured a network of heavily fortified, nearly impregnable mountain strongholds across the Elburz Mountains in Persia and the coastal ranges of Syria.
Just taking them over one by one.
Exactly. The most famous of these was Alamut.
Okay, Alamut. And just to clarify, because anyone who has played video games or read Western history knows this name, this is where the famous legends of the assassins originate,
Sounds
right?
clear. Okay, I thought so.
The term assassin actually entered European languages through the Crusaders' encounters with the Syrian branch of the Nizari Ismailis.
Right.
Western historical accounts and Marco Polo's exaggerated travelogues painted them as a drug-crazed cult of murderers.
But the notes say that's not true.
Our modern sources and contemporary historians note that those legends were wildly sensationalized propaganda, heavily pushed by their enemies.
Right, because they were terrified of them.
Yes, the stark reality is that during this period, the Ismailis were a heavily outnumbered minority surviving through asymmetrical warfare.
Because they couldn't just fight a traditional war. They couldn't defeat the massive Seljuk armies on an open battlefield. So they utilized targeted political assassinations against key military and political leaders to cause disproportionate chaos and keep their enemies at bay.
That is intensely strategic.
They were a fiercely independent, highly organized microstate surviving against overwhelming odds.
And they held out in those mountains for nearly 2 centuries.
200 years, yeah.
But then, in the 1200s, they faced something no mountain fortress could withstand.
The Mongols.
The Mongols sweep across Asia.
The Mongol invasions were an apocalyptic event.
Yeah.
The Mongol hordes under Hulagu Khan didn't just conquer, they obliterated. In 1256, the Mongols systematically besieged and utterly destroyed Alamut and the entire network of Ismaili fortresses.
Wipe them out.
They burned the legendary libraries, they massacred the population. The Ismaili state, their physical sovereignty, was completely annihilated.
So think about that. When you lose Alamut, when your empire is gone and your fortresses are smoking rubble, your community needs an entirely new nervous system just to survive.
They really do.
They couldn't rely on a state-sponsored military or imperial wealth anymore. How did they not just fade into the history books right then and there? Like, how did they physically survive being hunted across the Middle East?
This is where their unique theology actually saved them.
Really? How?
Because their belief system was already built on the concept of the batin, the inner hidden reality being more important than the zahir, the outer physical form.
Right, the dual layers we talked about.
Exactly. They were uniquely equipped to pivot. They adopted a practice known as taqiyya.
What is that?
Taqiyya is the religiously sanctioned concealment of one's true beliefs in times of mortal danger.
So they essentially went entirely underground.
They became invisible. To the outside world, many Ismaili communities disguise themselves as Sunni Muslims, or more commonly, they blended seamlessly into Sufi mystical orders.
Why Sufi?
Because Sufism also heavily emphasized inner spiritual truth and symbolic poetry, so it was a very natural camouflage.
Oh, that makes total sense.
They survived not by fighting, but by becoming highly decentralized and profoundly discreet. The Imam went into hiding, but he was still a living figure, secretly communicating with his followers.
So the network still existed, just in the shadows.
They maintained sophisticated underground communication networks. They smuggled religious dues, known as dasand, across vast distances to support the Imam and the scattered community.
Wow.
The loss of a physical state forced them to engineer incredibly robust, stateless community structures. They learned how to operate across borders in the shadows, maintaining fierce loyalty to a hidden living guide.
They took the organizational genius required to run an empire and a network of fortresses, and they just repurposed it to run a stateless, invisible, global community.
That's exactly what they did.
And because they engineered that decentralized survival mechanism centuries ago, it evolved directly into the highly sophisticated global network we see today.
It's a direct through line.
If we fast forward to the modern era, you can see the echoes of that survival strategy everywhere. Let's talk about how the community physically gathers today, because they don't have a state, but they have the Jamaat Khanas.
Yes. The Jamaat Khana is the absolute center of modern Ismaili life.
Okay.
These are designated spaces for community gathering and prayer, but calling them a mosque doesn't fully capture their function.
Why not?
In traditional Sunni or Twelver communities, a mosque is primarily a space for formal, ritualistic prayer and a weekly sermon. But a Jamaat Khana is a multidimensional nerve center for the community.
Right. Our sources emphasize that while they are spaces for profound spiritual reflection, they are also deeply pragmatic.
Very pragmatic.
They are used for community announcements, organizing educational programs, and coordinating massive volunteer charity initiatives.
They are the modern evolution of that underground network. It is the place where the spiritual mandate of the faith intersects directly with the social and material needs of the community on a daily basis.
So it's faith in action.
And that specific intersection, The blending of faith and tangible material action is most visible on a massive global scale through the Aga Khan Development Network, commonly known as the AKDN.
Okay, the AKDN is staggering in its scope. Break down what this network actually does.
The AKDN is a sprawling, incredibly well-funded international network of private, non-denominational development agencies founded and guided by the current Imam, the Aga Khan.
And it operates everywhere.
It operates in over 30 countries, employing tens of thousands of people. But it isn't just handing out emergency aid.
It's not just a charity.
No. The AKDN pours billions of dollars into long-term systemic development. We're talking healthcare, early childhood education, poverty reduction, massive infrastructure projects, cultural preservation, and restoring historic Islamic architecture.
It's nation-building stuff without a nation.
Precisely. Building state-of-the-art, world-class hospitals in East Africa, establishing elite universities in the remote mountains of Central Asia, and funding complex rural development programs in South Asia.
But, if you take a step back, this raises a fascinating question.
What's that?
Why does a religious institution, led by a direct descendant of the Prophet Muhammad, focus so intensely on secular material development? Like, why is the Imam building hydroelectric dams and rural hospitals instead of just building giant, opulent prayer halls?
Because you have to connect it back to their core theology.
The Zahir and Batin again?
Exactly. Remember how they view human nature. Human beings are a complex blend of material needs and high spiritual potential.
Right.
In the Ismaili worldview, you cannot separate the two. You cannot elevate a person's spirit. You cannot expect them to pursue the high philosophical truths of the universe if their physical body is ravaged by preventable disease.
That makes a lot of sense.
Or if their children are starving, or if they are trapped in the darkness of illiteracy.
So building a hospital or a school in a remote village isn't just a nice philanthropic side project.
Not at all.
It is fundamentally a religious act.
It is the ultimate modern manifestation of harmonizing the Zahir with the Batin. Improving the physical, material world, the Zahir, is a sacred prerequisite for unlocking the spiritual potential, the Batin of humanity.
Wow.
This brings us to a major sociological insight from the research. Ismaili Islam operates as one of the most highly organized, institutionally integrated religious minorities on the planet.
And historically, they had to be highly organized just to avoid extinction.
Exactly. Because they spent centuries living as a hunted, vulnerable minority without a state to protect them, their cultural tone deeply evolved.
That too.
Confrontation, violent fundamentalism, and isolationism are terrible, suicidal survival strategies for a minority group.
Right, that just puts a target on your back.
Yes. Instead, their historical trauma fostered a culture that deeply emphasizes pluralism, cosmopolitanism, diplomacy, and interfaith dialogue.
So they integrated instead of isolating.
The strategy for survival became, make yourself absolutely indispensable to the broader society through superior education, ethical business practices, and massive philanthropy.
There is a reflection from the source notes that I think captures this dynamic beautifully.
Which one?
It describes Ismaili Islam as operating almost like a bridge civilization.
Oh, yes.
It is like a carefully engineered, futuristic city where the relentless pursuit of knowledge is the main highway, seamlessly linking deeply ancient mystical tradition with cutting-edge modernity.
It's connecting spiritual depth with tangible, secular social development.
Exactly.
Bridge civilization is the perfect encapsulation. By necessity and by theology, they are constantly navigating and connecting different worlds, bridging the East and the West, tradition and modernity, the ethereal spirit, and the tangible matter.
We can clearly see how this carefully engineered city operates on a macro global scale with the AKDN and the historical empires. But I want to zoom all the way in.
Let's do it.
What does it actually feel like to walk the streets of that city today? Let's look at the psychology of the individual believer. How does an ordinary person navigate this highly structured, intellectually demanding system?
To understand the mindset of an individual believer today, we have to look at how their specific tradition defines the root causes of human struggle.
Okay.
As we discuss, they see humans as a synthesis of spirit and matter. But what is the ultimate cause of human suffering?
That's the core question of every religion.
Right. In many religious frameworks, the ultimate problem is defined merely as sin, disobedience to a set of rules, or a fall from grace. But in the Ismaili philosophical framework, the ultimate human diseases are defined as ignorance and injustice.
Ignorance and injustice. Not just breaking a rule, but fundamentally lacking understanding.
Yes. a lack of ethical awareness, and a paralyzing lack of intellectual understanding.
So ignorance is the disease.
And if ignorance is the primary disease that rots the soul in society, then the ultimate divine remedy is knowledge.
Knowledge is the cure.
Education, in this worldview, is not just about getting a prestigious degree to secure a high-paying job in finance. Education is literally the cure for the soul's ailments. It is a religious imperative to understand the world God created.
So, if that is the baseline, what actually defines a dedicated follower in this modern context? What are the expectations?
According to the sociological data and the sources, the identity of a modern Ismaili believer rests on a few core pillars.
What are they?
First is absolute, unwavering spiritual loyalty to the living Imam of the time.
Okay, the Aga Khan.
Second is strict adherence to ethical conduct in daily, secular life, honesty in business, care for the vulnerable.
Right.
Third is active, relentless participation in the community, usually through extensive, highly organized volunteering at the Khana or with the AKDN.
And the fourth?
And fourth is that insatiable, lifelong pursuit of knowledge.
Think about what that looks like in practice for, say, a young Ismaili professional living in Toronto, London, or Mumbai today.
It is demanding.
It is a constant, demanding balancing act. Their daily life involves personal prayer and spiritual reflection, but it also heavily involves community gatherings.
Yes, spending their weekends volunteering their professional skills to run the local Khana administration.
Right, or participating in massive charity walks and constantly pushing for higher professional and educational development.
They're asked by their theology to maintain a deeply rooted, mystical religious identity while simultaneously acting as highly engaged, highly educated, cosmopolitan global citizens.
But, you know, if you are sitting in traffic right now listening to this, commuting to work, and you are already drowning in modern information overload,
Which we all are.
totally exhausted by the constant demand to learn new software, read the devastating daily news, and stay informed on global politics. The idea of framing the relentless pursuit of knowledge as a strict religious duty probably sounds exhausting.
Does sound like a lot.
Does this intellectual rigor burn believers out, or is there a psychological mechanism that makes it work?
That is a brilliant point of friction. From the outside, looking at a religious mandate to be hyper-engaged intellectually sounds like a recipe for ultimate burnout.
Yeah, completely.
But from within the worldview, we have to remember their foundational concept of harmony.
Right, the Zahir and Batin.
The pursuit of knowledge isn't about aimless doom scrolling on social media or hoarding random trivia to win an argument.
It's not just noise.
It is about seeking profound meaning. When the modern world gets chaotic, noisy, and overwhelming, having a structured, deeply community-supported framework that tells you your curiosity is sacred, your efforts to understand the complexity of physics or medicine or literature are actively pleasing to the divine.
That reframes it completely.
It actually provides an incredible psychological anchor. It takes the overwhelming chaos of modern information and organizes it into a spiritual curriculum.
It takes the noise of the modern world and reframes it as purpose. That is a profound psychological tool.
It really is.
Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground today. We have gone on an absolute historical and philosophical epic.
We really have.
We started with a traumatized, grieving community in the 8th century, torn apart by a theological debate over which brother should lead them. And we traced how the choice to follow an unbroken line of living, continuous guides, fundamentally rewired their entire approach to reality.
We saw how they built an entire worldview on the dual concepts of Zahir and Batin, the outer form and the inner meaning.
Yeah, and we watched that philosophy fuel the imperial heights of the Fatimid Caliphate in Cairo.
And later, the fiercely independent mountain fortresses of Alamein.
And we explored the incredible resilience required to survive the apocalyptic destruction of the Mongols by turning their organizational genius inward.
Embracing concealment.
Right, and eventually evolving into the cosmopolitan humanitarian powerhouse of the Aga Khan Development Network that we see today.
A community that literally views the act of intellectual curiosity and the building of rural hospitals as the highest acts of spiritual faith.
It is a profound testament to the power of continuous adaptability.
It really is.
And I want to remind you why a deep dive like this matters, regardless of your own personal background or beliefs. You do not have to be an Ismaili Muslim, or any religion at all, to draw profound inspiration from this specific worldview.
Not at all.
In a modern culture that constantly tells us we have to choose a side, that we must choose between science and faith, between rigorous philosophy and mystical religion, between ancient tradition and modern progressive values.
Here's a millennium-old community that utterly refuses to see those things as enemies.
They view them as necessary, deeply harmonious lenses required to view the exact same ultimate truth.
It provides an incredibly powerful counter-narrative to the extreme polarization we see in almost every other sector of modern society.
It really does.
And it leaves us with an important, lingering question to consider.
What's that?
Human institutions, massive corporations, and powerful governments inevitably decay over time. It is the unyielding rule of history.
Yeah.
But when you look at the arc of Ismaili survival, enduring the loss of magnificent empires, surviving catastrophic Mongol invasions, and navigating the dizzying complexities of modern secular globalization, what could our own modern organizations learn from them?
That's a great question.
What could we learn from a community that survived for over a millennium, not by clinging fearfully to rigid, unchanging laws, but by placing absolute trust in intellectual adaptability, the pursuit of knowledge, and a living, constantly evolving leadership?
It is the ultimate historical proof that sometimes the only way an ancient tradition survives the crushing weight of time isn't by acting like an immovable stone, but by acting like a living, breathing, endlessly adapting ecosystem.
Beautifully said.
Thank you for taking this deep dive with us today. Keep questioning, keep learning, and we will catch you next time.